My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 68 years old, and last week, my only son tried to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my inheritance. Before I tell you how that ended with him losing a $50 million inheritance, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Right now, my Park Avenue apartment in Phoenix is silent, except for the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the frantic, buzzing vibration of my phone on the polished cherry wood end table. The screen glows for the 47th time in less than 12 hours. The name flashing is David, my son. I take a slow, deliberate sip from my teacup, admiring the delicate floral pattern Richard and I picked out 30 years ago. I don't reach for the phone. I let it go to voicemail just like the 46 calls before it. Why? Because yesterday afternoon, after I received a text message that ripped a clean, jagged hole right through my heart, I made a single phone call to my lawyer, Ben Carter. My voice was steady, colder than I'd ever heard it. Ben, I said, lock down the trust fund. Immediately. But to understand the profound silence in my apartment today, you need to feel the emotional hurricane that hit me 3 days ago. It all started, as so many heartbreaks do, with an act of love. It all started with a chocolate cake. My birthday was on a Tuesday. I woke up that morning with a familiar ache in my hands, the arthritis a constant reminder of the passing years. But it was a good ache. I was determined. I spent the entire morning in my kitchen, the one that still smells faintly of Richard's pipe tobacco if you stand in the right spot. I was making David's favorite, a German chocolate cake from a recipe my own mother had passed down to me. I wrestled with the heavy mixing bowl, my knuckles protesting, but I didn't care. Every stir of the spoon, every sift of the flour, was a prayer of love for my boy. By noon the cake was a masterpiece, cooling on the rack, its rich coconut pecan frosting glistening under the kitchen lights. I took a picture and texted it to him. Cake's ready whenever you want to stop by. I wrote, my heart filled with a quiet, hopeful joy. And then nothing. The afternoon sun slanted across my living room floor, the shadows growing long and then disappearing into the evening dusk. Every time a car with a loud engine drove past my building, my head would snap up. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification from the grocery store or a news alert, my breath would catch in my throat. But it was never him. The hours ticked by, each one a small sharp stab of disappointment. Tuesday bled into Wednesday. The cake sat on the counter untouched. I covered it with plastic wrap, trying to preserve the hope that came with it. By Thursday, it was no longer a symbol of love. It was a tombstone for my hope. My own son, my only child, had forgotten the day I brought him into this world. With a deep, shuddering sigh, I scraped the entire beautiful cake into the trash can. The sound of it hitting the bottom of the bin felt final. Just as I was washing my hands, my phone finally buzzed with a message from him. For a split second, a foolish, treacherous part of my heart leaped. Maybe he had a good reason. Maybe there was an emergency. I dried my hands and picked up the phone. His words glowed on the screen. Hey Mom. Happy birthday. Sorry it's a few days late. You should have reminded me about it. I read it once. Then twice. The phone suddenly felt cold, heavy, a dead weight in my hand. You should have reminded me. 5 words. 5 words that told me I was not a mother to be cherished, but a task on a to-do list that I myself was responsible for managing. The warmth in my chest, the warmth I had carried for him for 42 years, turned to ice. It was a clean, sharp, clarifying pain. In that moment, something inside me broke. Or maybe it was finally pieced back together into something stronger. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one Richard always used to sit in, and stared at the wall. The old Eleanor, the one who would have typed back, "Oh, it's okay, sweetie, I know you're busy," was gone. The Eleanor who would have made excuses for him, who would have shouldered the blame for his own carelessness, had been thrown out with the stale birthday cake. In her place was a woman who saw, with blinding clarity, exactly what her position in her son's life had become. I was a convenience, an obligation, an afterthought. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up the phone again. I wasn't going to reply to his text. No, I was done with that. I scrolled through my contacts, past the doctors and the pharmacy, my thumb hovering over a name I hadn't needed to call for anything serious in months. The old, forgiving Eleanor was gone for good. In her place was a woman who was about to make the most consequential phone call of her son's life. I took a deep breath and I pressed the screen. The man I was calling Ben Carter had been our family lawyer for 20 years. He'd handled Richard's will after the funeral, a time that was all just a gray, tear-soaked blur to me now. Richard, my husband of 40 years, was a brilliant and careful man. He built a tech business from the ground up and sold it at just the right time, leaving me with a fortune that was frankly more than one woman could ever need. The inheritance was a blessing, but I see now it was also a curse. It watered the seeds of greed in my son that I had been too blind to see. 5 years ago, I didn't know any of this. I just knew my heart was broken, and the only thing that seemed to soothe the ache was helping my son. When David and his wife Sarah told me they'd found their forever home in a gated community in Scottsdale, but the down payment was just out of reach, I didn't hesitate. I wrote a check for $200,000. Seeing the joy on their faces felt like a ray of sunshine in my grief-stricken world. I thought I was giving them a foundation. I didn't realize I was building the first floor of their prison of entitlement. Then came the tuition for the private academy for my grandchildren, Olivia and Noah. "It's the best, Mom," David had said over the phone. "It'll set them up for life, for a great college." Of course I agreed. What grandmother wouldn't want the best for her grandchildren? That became an annual check. Then there were the cars. Sarah needed a new SUV for safety, and David's promotion at his firm, a promotion I later learned was far less significant than he'd claimed, required a luxury sedan to look the part. I paid for those too. Soon the big one-time gifts weren't enough. David explained that with their mortgage and expenses, things were tight. So Ben Carter set up the trust. Every month, a substantial sum of money, more than the average American's yearly salary, was automatically transferred from my accounts to his. It was meant to be a safety net. Instead, it became their lifestyle. First, there was gratitude. There were flowers and thank you cards. The Sunday family dinners at their house felt warm. But slowly a chill crept in. The thank yous faded, replaced by an unspoken expectation. The phone calls changed. They stopped being, "Hi Mom, just calling to see how you are." They became, "Hey Mom, just a heads up, the property tax bill is due next month." Or, "Mom, Sarah saw this new patio set that would be perfect for when you come over." I remember one Sunday dinner vividly. I was telling a story about a trip Richard and I had taken to Italy, and I looked across the table at Sarah. She wasn't listening. Her face was illuminated by the blue glow of her phone as she scrolled through a catalog for kitchen renovations. "Caesar stone quartz," she murmured to David, completely ignoring me. "It's what all the new builds are using." I trailed off, my story dying in my throat. I looked at David, expecting him to nudge her to say something. He just gave me a weak, apologetic smile and changed the subject. I realized later, with a fresh wave of sickness, that I was the one paying for that quartz countertop she was dreaming of. I was no longer a person at those dinners. I was a guest of honor whose only honor was her checkbook. My grandchildren, Olivia and Noah, were polite but distant, trained to give me a hug when I arrived and a hug when I left, but spending the time in between glued to their iPads. They were learning from their parents. They were learning that Grandma Eleanor was a resource, not a relative. The calls became less and less frequent, unless a major holiday or a school payment was approaching. I was an ATM, a quiet, reliable, endlessly patient machine that dispensed cash on demand. And I let it happen. I let it happen because I was lonely, because the gaping hole Richard had left in my life was so vast, and because I desperately clung to the belief that this was what family did. You sacrifice. You give. And my greatest, most foolish sacrifice was convincing myself that their dependence was a form of love. I was too steeped in my own grief to see that I wasn't just bankrolling their lifestyle. I was funding the slow, methodical erosion of their respect for me. I was paying them to treat me like I was invisible. I was a bank, and I was too blind with love to see the vault was my own heart, and it was being emptied, one transaction at a time. That Tuesday morning, my birthday, I told myself things would be different. A birthday is special, I thought. It's a day that has to cut through the noise. I stood in my sun-drenched kitchen, the familiar scent of vanilla and melting chocolate filling the air. My hands, swollen and stiff from the arthritis that had become my unwelcome companion, ached as I gripped the wooden spoon. I stirred the thick, dark batter, ignoring the shooting pains in my knuckles. This was for David. This was his cake. The one he'd begged for every year since he was 5 years old. The one whose recipe was stained with fingerprints and memories. This cake was a bridge back to a time when I was just mom, not a line item in his budget. By noon it was perfect. A 3-layer monument to a mother's love, with its crown of coconut pecan frosting. I was so proud. I arranged it on my best porcelain cake stand, the one we only use for special occasions. I snapped a picture, my thumb fumbling a little on the screen, and sent it to him. "Cake's ready whenever you want to stop by," I typed, a smile on my face. The little checkmark on my phone showed the message was delivered. And then the waiting began. I busied myself around the apartment. I fluffed the pillows, tidied the magazines, wiped down counters that were already clean. I sat in my armchair pretending to read a book, but my eyes kept flicking to the clock on the mantelpiece. 1 p.m. 2 p.m. David worked in finance, maybe he was stuck in a meeting. 3 p.m. 4 p.m. The silence in the apartment grew louder, heavier. I started making excuses for him in my head. Traffic from Scottsdale to Phoenix could be brutal. Maybe he was trying to finish work early to surprise me. By 6 p.m. the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. It was beautiful, but it felt like a mockery. A beautiful end to an empty day. I stood by the window, peering down at the street, my heart leaping every time a silver sedan that looked like his turned the corner. None of them ever slowed down. That night I barely slept. I kept my phone on the nightstand, the volume turned all the way up just in case. It remained silent. Wednesday was worse. The hope from the day before had curdled into a sour knot of dread in my stomach. The cake sat on the counter, a cheerful, festive lie. I couldn't bring myself to look at it for too long. I called my friend Carol just to hear a friendly voice. "Did you have a nice birthday?" she asked. "Oh, it was lovely," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Very quiet." By Thursday morning the cake looked sad. The frosting had lost some of its sheen. It was an object of rejection, a 3-day-old testament to my foolishness. I knew I couldn't keep it any longer. To keep it would be to keep the door open for an apology that was clearly never coming. I walked into the kitchen, my movements stiff. I lifted the heavy glass dome off the cake stand. I didn't even slice a piece for myself. I picked up the entire perfect, untouched cake, carried it over to the trash can, and tilted the stand. It landed with a soft, dense thud. I stood there for a long moment staring down at it, lying amidst coffee grounds and junk mail. All that work, all that love, all that hope, now just garbage. A hot, stinging tear slid down my cheek, then another. I wasn't just throwing away a cake. I was throwing away the illusion I had so carefully constructed for 5 years. As I closed the lid on the trash can, my phone buzzed on the counter. My whole body went rigid. It was him. With a shaking hand I picked it up. Maybe this was it. The heartfelt apology. The frantic explanation. I swiped the screen open. "Hey Mom. Happy birthday. Sorry it's a few days late. You should have reminded me about it." I read the words and the tears stopped. The sorrow in my chest was instantly replaced by something cold and hard and heavy. It felt like a block of solid steel forming where my heart used to be. You should have reminded me. It wasn't an apology. It was an invoice. He was billing me for his own failure. He had outsourced the emotional labor of remembering his own mother's birthday to me. In that moment, standing in my silent kitchen, smelling the faint, sweet ghost of a cake that was now in the trash, I knew I wasn't just forgotten. I was irrelevant. My only function was to provide and to remind him of my existence when it was convenient. And that realization didn't just break my heart. Changed everything. After the phone call to Ben, a strange calm settled over me. For 6 days my phone was blissfully quiet. No calls from David, no texts from Sarah. It was as if their forgetfulness had extended to my very existence. And frankly, it was a relief. I went to lunch with Carol. I spent an afternoon at the museum. I read 3 books. For the first time in 5 years I wasn't waiting by the phone, wondering if my son needed anything. I was just living. Then on the 7th day the dam broke. It started with a single call on Monday afternoon. David. I looked at the name, letting the phone ring until it went to voicemail. A minute later a text popped up. "Mom, call me. Something weird is going on with the bank." I smiled. Weird was one word for it. An hour later he called again. And again. By evening the calls were coming every 15 minutes. The tone of his voicemails, which I listened to with a cup of chamomile tea in my hand, was a masterclass in escalating panic. The first one was just confused. "Hey Mom, it's me. Listen, I was trying to pay the mortgage and the transfer didn't go through. Must be some kind of glitch. Can you call me back when you get this? Thanks." The fourth voicemail, an hour later, had a distinct edge of worry. "Mom, it's me again. I called the bank. They said there's no glitch. They said the automatic transfer from the trust was canceled. You didn't cancel it, did you? Please call me. This is kind of serious." By 8 p.m., Sarah had joined the chorus. Her texts were far more direct. "Eleanor, David said the money isn't there. What did you do? You need to call us now. This isn't funny." I poured myself a small glass of sherry, the one Richard and I used to enjoy after dinner. I swirled the amber liquid, watching it catch the light. I thought of all the years I had sweated, worrying if I was doing enough, giving enough, being enough for a son who couldn't be bothered to circle a date on a calendar. Now it was his turn to sweat. The 10th voicemail from David was when the worry had fully blossomed into panic. His voice was higher, strained. "Mom, for God's sake, pick up the phone. Sarah's credit card was declined at the grocery store." The grocery store. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is? Whatever point you're trying to make, we get it. Just turn the money back on. I chuckled into my sherry. Embarrassing? Try spending your 68th birthday alone after baking a cake for a son who forgot you were born. The calls kept coming, a relentless, desperate barrage. By the time I was getting ready for bed, the count was 23 calls from David and 6 from Sarah. But it was the last voicemail, left at 11:47 p.m., that truly sealed his fate. It was the one that I saved. The one that Ben Carter would eventually hear. David's voice was ragged, stripped of all pretense, the voice of a cornered animal. "Mom, look. I know you're angry about the birthday thing. I'm sorry, okay? I am. I'm a terrible son. We can talk about it, I promise. But this is a nightmare. This isn't funny anymore. Please just call me back. We need that money." He hung up. I played it back just to be sure. There it was. The truth, stark and ugly. Not "we need you." Not "we're worried about you." Not even "we love you." Just, "we need that money." For 5 years I had told myself a story. A story about a loving mother helping her son build a life. A story about family and loyalty and sacrifice. With 4 words, he had burned that storybook to ashes. He had finally told me the truth of my worth to him. I wasn't his mother. I was his provider. My love was irrelevant. My bank account was essential. I turned off my phone, placed it face down on the nightstand and climbed into bed. I fell asleep almost instantly, and for the first time in a very, very long time I slept soundly through the night. He had no idea the price of that final, honest voicemail. He thought he was at the end of his nightmare. In reality, it was just beginning. And now, it was my turn to show him the true cost of his disrespect. The next morning, I was woken not by my alarm, but by a sound that I hadn't heard in the 15 years I'd lived in this quiet, secure building. A frantic, angry pounding on my front door. It was 7:30 a.m. I knew exactly who it was. I didn't rush. I calmly went about my morning routine. I showered, chose a comfortable cashmere sweater and a pair of gray slacks. I even put on the simple string of pearls Richard had given me for our 25th anniversary. If I was going to have this conversation, I was going to have it on my terms, feeling dignified and in control. As I walked towards the door, the pounding started again, louder this time. I glanced through the peephole. It was a sight to behold. David was pacing the hallway like a caged tiger, his hair a mess, running his hands through it repeatedly. Sarah stood beside him, rigid as a statue, clutching her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. They looked like what they were, desperate. I took a deep breath, plastered a serene smile on my face and opened the door. "Good morning, dears," I said, my voice light and pleasant. "What a surprise. What brings you by so early?" David didn't even answer. He pushed past me into the foyer, his face a thunderous mask of fury. Sarah followed close behind, her eyes sweeping around my apartment as if looking for something to smash. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" David demanded, spinning around to face me. "The bank says all transfers from your accounts have been stopped. Our mortgage payment bounced. Our car payments bounced." Sarah's credit cards have all been declined. I closed the door softly behind them and turned the deadbolt with a decisive click. The sound seemed to echo in the tense silence. They both looked at me, their chests heaving like children who had just discovered that the magic candy store was, in fact, closed for good. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked sweetly. "We don't want coffee," Sarah snapped, her voice shrill. "We want to know why you've cut off our money without any warning." "Our money?" The possessiveness in her tone was astounding. The money Richard had worked his entire life for, the money I had managed and preserved, was somehow theirs by divine right. Interesting. I ignored her outburst and walked into the kitchen. "Well, I'd like some," I said, "so I'm going to make a pot." I moved with deliberate slowness, taking out the filters, measuring the coffee grounds, filling the carafe with water. Let them watch me. For years I had moved at their frantic pace, answered their urgent demands. Now they would wait. "I've been doing some thinking lately," I said conversationally, my back to them as the coffee maker began to gurgle. "About family. About financial responsibility. About basic human decency. You know, little things. Like remembering important dates." David had the grace to look ashamed. He sank onto my plush living room sofa. "Mom, if this is about your birthday." "Oh, it's about so much more than my birthday," I interrupted, turning to face them, leaning back against the counter. "Your birthday was just the last straw on a camel that had been carrying far too much for far too long. Do you know how long it's been since either of you just called to ask how I am? Not before asking for something, just asking." They stared at me, their faces blank. The question genuinely seemed to confuse them. "I'll tell you," I continued, my voice still calm, but with an edge of steel they had never heard before. 14 months. It has been 14 months since either of you treated me like a person instead of a bank account." Sarah stepped forward, her face flushed with indignation. "That's not fair. We invite you to dinner every Sunday. You invite me to dinners where you ignore me while you discuss the kitchen renovations I'm paying for, the Hawaiian vacation I'm funding, and the private schools I'm subsidizing," I retorted. "I'm not a guest at those dinners, Sarah. I'm the entertainment. I'm the crazy old lady with the checkbook you tolerate for an hour a week because it's the price of admission to my bank vault." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. The fight seemed to drain out of David. He looked smaller, deflated. "Mom," he said quietly, I know we haven't been the most attentive, but cutting us off completely? Without a word? That's extreme. Extreme." I walked over to my antique writing desk and pulled out a thin file folder. I'd had my lawyer, Ben Carter, pull the numbers yesterday. "Let's talk about extreme, shall we?" I opened the folder. "In the 5 years since your father's funeral, I have given your family a grand total of $1,247,000 in direct payments and gifts." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "In return for that," I went on, my gaze locking with David's, "you have called me to ask about my health or my well-being exactly 7 times. 7. But you have called to ask for money, or to remind me about an upcoming expense 43 times. The numbers just hung there in the air. An indictment of everything our relationship had become. The financial arrangement we had was based on my love for my family," I said, my voice softening slightly. "When you stop providing the love and respect, I stop providing the money. It's that simple." I gave them a moment to absorb it, then I made my move. "But," I said, walking towards them, "I'm going to make you a proposition." They both looked up, a flicker of hope in their eyes. "You have 30 days. 30 days to show me that I matter more to you than my money does. Not through panicked phone calls or angry demands. Through genuine, consistent human connection. If at the end of those 30 days I feel like your mother again instead of your financier, we can discuss resuming some reasonable level of support." David's face lit up. "We can do that, Mom. Absolutely. We can. But," I added, holding up a single finger, "if I detect even a hint of performance, if this feels like an act designed to get the money flowing again, the offer is off the table. Permanently." They left, stunned and furious. I knew they would try to play my game. They thought it was a simple test of their acting skills. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't possibly have imagined, was that they were already playing a much more dangerous game of their own. The performance began the very next day. It was so transparent, so clumsy, it would have been laughable if it wasn't so insulting. The first call was from David. His voice, usually rushed and clipped, was now dripping with a syrupy, artificial sweetness. "Hi, Mom. Just calling to see how you're feeling today. I realized we never ask about your health enough. I was in the middle of arranging some flowers I'd bought for myself. I had to physically put the vase down on the counter to keep from dropping it." "I'm fine, David," I said, keeping my own voice neutral. "How thoughtful of you to ask." "Great, great," he said quickly. "And hey, I was thinking, maybe we could have lunch this week? Just the two of us. You know, like old times." "Old times?" I racked my brain. We had never had old times that involved just the two of us having lunch. Every outing had been a family affair, usually orchestrated by me. He was inventing a history that didn't exist to fit his new narrative. I played along, agreeing to a lunch I knew was just part of the script. The next call, less than an hour later, was from my 14-year-old granddaughter, Olivia. My heart ached the moment I heard her voice. She had never, not once in her life, called me just to chat. "Hi, Grandma Eleanor," she began, her voice sounding unnaturally high and cheerful. "I just wanted to call and tell you about my day at school. We did this really cool experiment in science class." The words tumbled out, rehearsed and stiff. It was like she was reading from a teleprompter. Poor girl. They had turned their own daughter into a pawn. She launched into a detailed, overly enthusiastic account of her classes, her friends, her teachers. It broke my heart, not because she was lying, but because this forced, hollow conversation was a stark reminder of how little we actually knew each other. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke gently. "Olivia, sweetheart," I said, "you don't have to do this." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. Do what, Grandma?" "Pretend," I said softly. "Pretend to be interested in talking to me because your parents told you to call." The silence stretched, and then I heard a small, quiet sniffle. When she spoke again, the fake cheerfulness was gone, replaced by the small, genuine voice of a confused teenager. "Dad said you were mad at us," she whispered. He said maybe you wouldn't be our grandma anymore if we didn't try harder." I felt a hot flash of pure rage crawl up my neck. Those bastards. They had terrified their own child, framing me as the monster who might abandon them, all to manipulate me. "Olivia, you listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice firm but full of all the love I felt for her. "I will always be your grandmother. No matter what happens between me and your parents. That will never ever change. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Grandma," she said, sounding relieved. "Good," I said. "Now, do you actually want to talk to me? Or would you rather go do whatever 14-year-olds do when they're not being used as pawns in their parents' drama?" A tiny giggle escaped her. "Can I go? I have homework." "Of course you can, sweetheart. I love you." "Love you too, Grandma." The call ended and I sank into my chair, my anger warring with a deep sadness. A few days later, an enormous bouquet of white lilies arrived, my least favorite flower, a fact they'd clearly forgotten, if they ever knew it at all. The card read, "Thinking of you. Love, David and Sarah." Later that day, a letter arrived written in my 12-year-old grandson Noah's messy scrawl. But it was too neat, the words too carefully chosen. "Dear Grandma," it began. "I have been thinking about how awesome you are." Noah had never used the word awesome to describe anything other than a video game. Can you imagine? Using your own children as pawns in a game of greed. It's disgusting. If you think that's low, just wait. I promise you it gets so much worse. This wasn't about winning back my love. This was a calculated performance. And I was about to find out it was just the opening act for a horror show I never could have seen coming. 2 weeks into their 30-day performance, I was having lunch with my dearest friend Carol. We were at our favorite little cafe, the one with the checkered tablecloths and the best iced tea in Phoenix. We've been friends for 30 years. She knew me better than almost anyone, and she was the only one I had told the whole unvarnished truth to. She was stirring her tea, a thoughtful look on her face. "Eleanor," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "I ran into Sarah Vance yesterday, at the hospital fundraiser." "Oh," I said, taking a bite of my salad. "She was talking to a few of the other women on the board," Carol continued, not looking at me. "She was telling them all about your..." Recent struggles. My fork clattered against the plate. My what? Carol finally met my eyes, her own filled with a mixture of anger and concern. She was painting a picture, Eleanor. A very convincing one. She told them you've been acting erratically ever since Richard's funeral, making impulsive financial decisions, becoming withdrawn and paranoid. My blood ran cold. The words hit me like a physical blow. While they were sending me flowers and forcing my grandchildren to write scripted letters of affection, they were simultaneously assassinating my character to anyone who would listen. She said. Carol took a deep breath. That you've become difficult to manage, and that she and David are very concerned. They're considering having you evaluated for competency issues. The world tilted on its axis. Competency issues. The phrase echoed in my head. They weren't just trying to get the money back. They were trying to take control of everything. Carol, are you absolutely certain? I whispered, my voice hoarse. Eleanor, I've known you for 30 years. You're sharper than most people half your age, she said fiercely. But Sarah was good. She looked so worried, so compassionate. She had several women nodding along sympathetically, telling her how brave she was being. I spent the rest of the lunch in a daze, just nodding and pushing food around my plate. When I got home, the beautiful apartment that had always been my sanctuary suddenly felt like a gilded cage they were trying to lock me in. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. Ben, it's Eleanor, I said, dispensing with the pleasantries. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has anyone from my family contacted you recently? Specifically, asking about my mental state or my financial competency. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When Ben finally spoke, his professional tone was laced with discomfort. Eleanor, he said slowly, attorney-client privilege is complex, but given the circumstances, yes. Michael called me last week. My knuckles went white as I gripped the phone tighter. And what did he want? He said he was concerned, Ben said, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice. He mentioned some unusual financial decisions you've been making. He asked me to explain the legal process for having someone's competency evaluated, for establishing a legal guardianship over their assets. I had to sit down. My knees felt weak. It was true. It was all true. What did you tell him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I told him, Ben said, his voice turning hard as steel, that you were one of the most competent and clear-headed clients I have ever had the privilege of representing, and that any such attempt would be a frivolous, malicious waste of everyone's time and money. But Eleanor, the fact that he asked. I know, I said, cutting him off. I know what it means. After I hung up, I sat in my armchair and stared at the enormous bouquet of white lilies they had sent, which were now starting to wilt on my dining table. Every petal suddenly looked like a lie. Every cloying sweet scent was part of an elaborate trap. This wasn't a clumsy attempt to win back my affection. This was a calculated strategic campaign to declare me mentally unfit. The carefully orchestrated phone calls, the sudden feigned interest in my well-being, the flowers, the children's letters. It wasn't about love. It was about building a case. They were creating a paper trail of their loving concern, so that when they finally made their move, they would look like devoted children struggling with a difficult, irrational old woman who had cut them off without cause. The revelation should have crushed me. It should have left me heartbroken. Instead, it filled me with a cold, clear, calculating fury I hadn't felt in decades. They wanted to play games. Fine. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I was Richard Vance's wife. I had sat through decades of his business negotiations. I had learned from the best. They thought they were playing checkers. I was about to teach them how to play chess. The game had changed, and I was done playing defense. The fury didn't make me reckless. It made me focused. The sadness was gone, replaced by an icy resolve. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my generosity for senility. It was a fatal error in judgment. My first move was to build a fortress of truth around myself. My second was to lay a trap. But before I could do either, they made another move, a clumsy, arrogant one that played right into my hands. My phone rang on Friday afternoon. It wasn't David or Sarah. It was Mr. Henderson, the manager at my bank branch, a kind man who had handled my accounts for years. Eleanor, he said, his voice flustered. I apologize for bothering you at home, but I had a rather unusual visit today. Let me guess, I said calmly. My son, David? Why, yes, he said, surprised. He came in asking about the status of the trust account. When I told him all transfers had been suspended per your instructions, he became quite agitated. He implied that you hadn't been yourself lately, that you were perhaps confused about your finances, and that as your only son, he should be granted access to oversee things for your own protection. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless for a second. He was actively trying to usurp my authority. What did you do, Mr. Henderson? I asked. I told him, the banker said, his voice firm with professional indignation, that I have known you for 10 years, and you have always been perfectly lucid and in complete command of your affairs. I also informed him that attempting to gain access to a client's account under false pretenses is a very serious matter. He left rather quickly after that. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice filled with genuine gratitude. You have no idea how much I appreciate that. That call was the final piece of fuel on the fire. It was time to stop reacting and start acting. First, I called Ben Carter back. Ben, I said, I want to schedule a complete mental competency evaluation with the best neuropsychologist in Manhattan. I want it on record. I want it documented, Ben. Ironclad. Eleanor, you don't need to do that. He started to argue. Yes, Ben. I do, I interrupted. When this is over, I want a stack of paper so thick and so irrefutable that they will never be able to whisper the word incompetent in the same sentence as my name again. Next, I hired a private investigator. Ben recommended a woman named Maria Flores, a former NYPD detective known for being discreet, thorough, and relentless. I met her for coffee that afternoon. She was sharp with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Vance, she said after I laid out the situation, what exactly do you need from me? Everything, I said. I want to know everything about my son and daughter-in-law's financial situation. Bank accounts, credit cards, debts, assets, spending patterns. I also need you to check if they've been consulting with any other lawyers besides Ben. I need to know exactly what kind of enemy I'm facing. She nodded, a grim smile on her face. I can do that. My final move was the most difficult. It required me to become an actress, to swallow my disgust and play their game but on my terms. That evening, I picked up the phone and dialed David's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice wary. Mom. I took a deep breath and summoned every ounce of maternal warmth I could fake. David, honey. It's me. I let my voice crack just a little. I've been doing some thinking about our conversation. About everything. You have. The caution in his voice was now mixed with a sliver of greedy hope. Yes, I said, letting out a soft, contrived sigh. And I think you're right. I've been too harsh. Too emotional. I think since your father died. I just haven't been myself. I've been lonely. I miss our family dinners. I miss being a part of your lives. I want to fix this. The relief that flooded his voice was palpable, so thick I could almost taste it. Oh, Mom, that's wonderful. I knew you'd come around. You're such a loving, generous person. The condescension was almost enough to make me hang up, but I held on. I want to have dinner, I said, this Friday. All of us. At your house. I want to apologize to you and Sarah properly, and to the children. I want to discuss how we can move forward, together. Of course, Mom. Absolutely, he gushed. Nora will be so relieved. She's been worried sick about you. I'll bet she has, I said softly. We hung up and I sat there in the silence, my heart pounding not with fear, but with adrenaline. He took the bait. He thought he had one. He thought the crazy old lady had finally come to her senses. He had no idea he was a fly buzzing happily, heading straight for the most intricate and expensive spiderweb he could ever imagine. He had no idea he was walking into the most expensive dinner of his life. Maria Flores worked faster than I could have hoped. On Thursday morning, less than 4 days after I'd hired her, a thick manila envelope arrived at my door by courier. There was no return address, just as I'd requested. I took it to my dining room table, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and opened it. What I found inside was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just a story of financial irresponsibility. It was a 5-year saga of calculated deception and breathtaking greed. The first section was their debt. It was staggering. Maria had managed to get copies of their credit card statements. I spread them out on the table, a paper monument to their avarice. Sarah's statements were a litany of luxury brands: Chanel, Gucci, Louis Vuitton. There were charges for $500 shoes, $2,000 handbags, spa days that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. David's were filled with expensive dinners at steakhouses, golf club memberships, and payments for a fantasy football league with $1,000 buy-in. They weren't just living beyond their means. They were living in a completely different galaxy of financial reality, funded entirely by me. But the debt was just the appetizer. The main course was far more sickening. Maria had uncovered something I never knew existed: a secondary bank account under a joint LLC they had formed. For the past 4 years, they had been taking the large, lump sum monthly payments from my trust, depositing them into this LLC account, and then paying their bills from there. To a casual observer, it would look like they were paying their mortgage and car payments from a legitimate business account. It was a classic money laundering technique, designed to obscure the source of the funds. They were creating a clean paper trail, making my money look like their money. But it was the last section of the report that made me feel like I couldn't breathe. Maria had found their lawyer. Not Ben Carter, but a different one. A specialist in estate planning and elder law. And she had found the documents. There, in black and white, was a digital file containing their entire plan. It was a 5-year strategy to establish legal guardianship over my assets. The first document, a memorandum outlining their initial concerns about my erratic emotional state and reckless gifting, was dated just 6 weeks after Richard's funeral. 6 weeks. While I was still drowning in grief, barely able to get out of bed in the morning, they were already meeting with a lawyer to plot how to steal my future. I scrolled through the files on the thumb drive Maria had included. There were emails between David and the lawyer discussing how to document instances of cognitive decline. There were notes from Sarah about conversations she'd had with my friends, twisting my words, painting my grief as instability. Every forgotten appointment, every emotional phone call I'd made to my son in a moment of loneliness, had been cataloged and weaponized against me. They weren't just taking my money. They were stealing my memories and recasting them as evidence in the trial for my own freedom. They had been playing the long game. The gradual emotional distance, the increasing financial demands, the casual cruelty. It was all designed to establish a pattern for a judge. The pattern of a generous but unstable widow who needed to be protected from her own poor judgment. The loving, concerned children who had no choice but to step in and take control. I closed the folder, my hands steady. The shock had passed, leaving behind a terrifying clarity. I had thought I was teaching them a lesson about gratitude. How foolish I'd been. They hadn't been taking a class. They had been teaching one. And the subject was betrayal. For 5 years, every hug, every "I love you," every shared holiday meal was part of a meticulously crafted lie. Every time I had opened my heart and my wallet to them, I had been handing them another stone to build the walls of my prison. The rage I felt was no longer hot. It was a glacial, slow-moving force of nature. I looked at the clock. 24 hours until dinner. Friday night couldn't come soon enough. I arrived at their Scottsdale home at precisely 7 o'clock on Friday evening. The stage was set for the final act of their performance, and I had to admit, they were committed to their roles. Candles were lit. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The scent of a roasting chicken filled the air. David greeted me at the door with a hug that felt like a business transaction, and Sarah kissed the air beside my cheek, gushing about how wonderful I looked. "Mom, you look absolutely radiant," she cooed, taking my coat. "That color is so flattering on you." I smiled politely. It was a simple navy blue dress. "Thank you, Sarah. You look lovely as well." My grandchildren, Olivia and Noah, seemed genuinely happy to see me, and they were the only source of real warmth in the house. They hugged me tightly, their affection a painful reminder of what was at stake, and what had already been corrupted. Dinner was a masterclass in deception. They were brilliant. They asked about my friends, my book club, my garden. They laughed at my old stories about their father. They listened, nodding with feigned intensity, their eyes wide with fraudulent concern. David kept refilling my wine glass, treating me like a beloved queen holding court. They were so good at it, so convincing that for a fleeting, terrifying moment I almost doubted myself. I almost let myself believe the beautiful lie they were serving alongside the roasted potatoes. But then I would feel the weight of Maria Flores's report, tucked safely in my handbag, and the illusion would shatter. After dessert, a tiramisu Sarah proudly announced she had made from scratch. Though I recognized the box from the gourmet market, the moment came. David cleared his throat, stood up, and raised his wine glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, beaming at me. "To family, to forgiveness, and to my mother, Eleanor. The most generous, loving, and supportive woman I know. We haven't always shown our appreciation the way we should have. But we want you to know, Mom, we love you. We're so glad to have you back." Sarah and the kids echoed, "To Grandma," and they all drank. My glass remained on the table. When they sat down, their faces were glowing, expectant. This was it. This was the moment they were waiting for. The moment when the tearful, grateful matriarch would announce that the bank was open for business once again. I took a slow sip of water, dabbed my lips with my napkin, and then I stood up. "Thank you, David," I said, my voice clear and steady. "That was a lovely toast. And I have something I'd like to say as well." They leaned forward, their smiles plastered in place. "These past few weeks have been so enlightening." I began, letting my eyes drift from David to Sarah. "David, your sudden daily interest in my health has been incredibly touching. Sarah, your invitations to go shopping, your compliments, they've really meant the world to me. And children," I said, my voice softening as I looked at Olivia and Noah, "your letters and phone calls warmed your old grandma's heart. They were practically vibrating with anticipation." I let the silence hang for a beat longer. "It's all made me realize how much I've been missing," I continued. "How important it is to be clear-headed and truly involved in managing our family's affairs. Which is why," I paused, looking directly at David, "I've decided to be much more involved from now on." His smile widened. This was it. Your concern for my well-being was so profound it inspired me. It made me realize that at my age one can't be too careful. So to put everyone's mind at ease, especially yours, I went ahead and had a complete psychological evaluation done this week with a top neuropsychologist. The smiles on their faces didn't disappear, but they froze. They became brittle like glass about to shatter. "Clean bill of mental health, I'm happy to report," I said brightly. "The doctor said I'm as sharp as ever." I let that sink in. The silence in the room was now deafening. The soft jazz suddenly sounded loud and intrusive. "And," I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious, "your talk of financial responsibility also made me think." It made me realize I hadn't been paying close enough attention to the details. So I hired a private investigator to do a thorough financial review. Very thorough. The color drained from David's face. Sarah looked like she had been slapped. I let the words hang in the air, watching the beautiful illusion they had constructed crumble into dust around them. Then I reached into my purse. My hand closed around the thick manila envelope. I pulled it out and placed it on the center of the polished dining room table with a soft, definitive thud. The envelope sat on the table between us, a pale rectangular bomb in the candlelight. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. Not with fear, but with a righteous, liberating fury. "It's a fascinating read," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. I tapped the envelope with my index finger. "It details 5 years of conversations with a lawyer, not Ben Carter, a different one. A specialist. It seems you've been planning to establish a financial guardianship over me, since just after your father's funeral." Sarah stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "I don't know what you think you found, but I know exactly what I found," I snapped, my voice finally rising sharp and unforgiving. "I found 5 years of a meticulously crafted plot. I found emails about documenting my cognitive decline. I found notes about you, Sarah, twisting my words to my own friends to make me sound unstable. I found a secret bank account designed to launder my money to make it look like yours. And I found your ultimate goal. To have me declared legally incompetent so you could have unfettered access to my assets. Permanently." David's voice was a choked whisper. "Mom, it's not what it looks like." "Really?" I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. Because it looks like fraud. It looks like elder abuse. It looks like two greedy, entitled people who decided it was easier to steal from a grieving widow than to earn their own damn living. I looked over at Olivia and Noah. Their faces were pale with shock and horror, their eyes wide as they stared at their parents, seeing them for the first time not as protectors, but as villains in a story they didn't understand. My heart broke for them, but this had to be done. Here's what's going to happen now, I continued, my voice calm and resolute again. I was in complete control. You're going to listen. First, you are going to pack your things and move out of this house by the end of the month. The house, I added, looking around the opulent dining room, that I bought. The deed is in my name, which means I can evict you whenever I choose. And I so choose. Sarah made a sputtering sound, a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Second, I said, ignoring her, you are both going to get jobs. Real jobs. With a real salary. You are going to learn what it means to live within your means, not mine. Maybe you'll have to downsize. Sell one of your cars. Pull the kids out of that ridiculously expensive private school. I don't really care. You'll figure it out. Millions of people do it every day. The thought of Sarah, who hadn't worked a day since college, having to get a job seemed to physically pain her. That brought me a small, grim satisfaction. And third, I said, my gaze locking onto David's, if you ever attempt to contact me again, not a call, not a text, not an email, not a letter, I will turn this entire file over to the district attorney. Ben assures me we have more than enough evidence to press criminal charges. And believe me, I will. I stood up, my chair making no sound on the plush rug. I walked towards the front door, my purse in my hand. With my hand on the doorknob, I turned back for one final time. Oh, and one more thing, I said, a thought striking me with beautiful, perfect clarity. I met with Ben yesterday. We made some adjustments to my will. The final one. I looked directly at my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the man whose life I had funded. The entire estate, all $50 million of it, is being placed in a new charitable foundation. It will provide grants to organizations that protect elderly people from financial abuse and exploitation by their own families. Congratulations, David. Your greed didn't just cost you your mother. It just cost you a future you thought was guaranteed. I didn't wait for a reaction. I opened the door, stepped out into the cool night air, and closed it softly behind me, leaving them in the ruins of the beautiful, expensive, empty life they had built with my money and my trust. The click of the lock was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The drive home from Scottsdale to Phoenix was peaceful. I had expected to feel a storm of emotions, rage, sorrow, maybe even a lingering shred of grief for the family I thought I had. Instead, I just felt quiet. It was the quiet of a forest after a wildfire has passed through, clearing out all the dead undergrowth, leaving behind a clean slate, ready for new life. For the first time in 5 years since the day Richard died, I felt truly, completely free. The heavy weight of their expectations, their unspoken demands, their constant, draining need, it was gone. The burden I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying had been lifted. I drove with the windows down, letting the desert air whip through my hair. I wasn't just Eleanor Vance, the widow, the mother, the bank. I was just Eleanor. And I had a life to live. In the weeks that followed, I began to rediscover that life. I called Carol and we booked a river cruise through Europe, something Richard and I had always talked about but never did. I started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children, their innocent, happy faces a soothing balm on my soul. I threw out the expensive, uncomfortable furniture in my guest room and turned it into a painting studio. My first canvas was a riot of color, sunflowers bright and defiant. Of course, the matter of my grandchildren weighed heavily on my mind. They were innocent victims in their parents' disgusting war. They didn't deserve to suffer for their parents' sins. I met with Ben Carter again. We established a new separate, ironclad trust fund for Olivia and Noah. The money for their education and their future was secure, locked away where neither David nor Sarah could ever touch it. It would be managed by a professional trustee until they each turned 25. I wrote them each a long letter, explaining that my love for them was unconditional and would never change, and that one day when they were old enough, I would tell them the whole story. I would not let my son and his wife poison my relationship with the only good things that came out of their marriage. I learned through Ben that David and Sarah sold the Scottsdale house in a panic, for far less than it was worth. They moved into a small rented townhouse in a less fashionable part of town. David is still at his job, but without my money to grease the wheels of his social life, his career has reportedly stalled. I heard Sarah got a job as a receptionist at a dental office. I don't feel anger when I think of them anymore. I don't feel much of anything. They are strangers to me now, ghosts from a life I no longer live. I learned a very hard, very expensive lesson. You cannot buy love, and you cannot purchase respect. They have to be earned, freely given. Forcing them, funding them only creates a grotesque imitation. My silence, my refusal to answer those 47 phone calls, cost my son a $50 million fortune. But it bought me back my life. Bought me back my peace. Bought me back my soul. And that is a bargain I would make again in a heartbeat. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I felt I had to. For anyone out there who has ever felt taken for granted, unappreciated, or invisible in your own family, I want you to hear me. Your worth is not defined by what you can give to others. It is inherent and it is non-negotiable. Sometimes the most powerful act of love is loving yourself enough to say, no more. If you've ever had to make a difficult stand like this in your own life, I would be honored to read your story in the comments below. Please know that you are not alone. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. Your voice matters.